Aang can no longer ignore the reality of the 100-year war and the damage it wreaked upon his people, and so he must rely on those closest to him to help him through this terrible and difficult time. This is Avatar Explained for episode 103, The Southern Air Temple, Part 1, Synopsis. Aang and the group arrive at the Southern Air Temple, where Aang hopes to find Monk Gyatso, his mentor, before he went into the iceberg for 100 years. However, Monk Gyatso is not alive, and not because he died of old age. In fact, the entire Air Nation is gone. Aang refuses to accept this at first. He thinks that someone somehow must have survived. He justifies this by thinking that the Fire Nation could never have gotten to the top of the temples. He argues that no one can get to these temples without a flying bison. But he's wrong. The bones of the massacred airbenders are scattered throughout the temple. Katara tries to hide them, but she can't. Not forever. She can't hide the truth. Aang finds out, and he becomes irate. He goes into the Avatar state and starts wreaking havoc on everything in sight. At first, they can't do anything about it. Eventually, Katara manages to calm him down. She manages to convince him that she'll be there for him, that she and Sokka will be his family, that they will always be there for him even if no one else is. And this manages to finally calm him down. Meanwhile, Zuko goes through his own trials and tribulations. He confronts Zhao, a leading officer in the Fire Nation Navy. Zhao wants to find the Avatar too, and he knows that Zuko has confronted him. Zuko has no desire to see his quest to find the Avatar taken from him by this older man, so he challenges him to an Agni Kai, or fire duel. Zhao wins, but only because he plays dirty. Uncle Iroh congratulates Zuko for always having honor. Zuko, defeated, angry, and unsure, continues his quest to try and find the Avatar. Team Avatar picks up Momo, a lemur, and a permanent addition to the team. Sokka tries to eat him. Aang thankfully prevents that. And Momo goes and helps Sokka anyway, giving him a nice pile of food to eat. Things are looking slightly up for Team Avatar. They've been through a lot, and they know how alone they truly are now. But at least they have each other. This is as opposed to Zuko, who has nothing. He has his uncle, Iroh, but at this point he is not truly accepting of Iroh's help. Part 2, Analysis. This is my favorite Avatar episode so far. It's not the best of all Season 1, but it is easily in the top handful of episodes in this season. It's the first real indication of what the show is capable of being. It's more than just an action-packed, thrilling, beautiful show. It has real emotional power and weight and gravitas. It can handle dark moments without seeming too unnecessarily nihilistic or grim. There's real emotional poignancy and power and empathy, and that really shines through here all throughout the episode. I love how Katara doesn't want to tell Aang. It's a real conflict for her. She wants him to be happy. She wants everyone she cares about to be happy, but this is at the expense of the truth, and ultimately the truth wins out anyway. And the implication here is heavily that Katara should have told him, because that would have softened the blow, as does Aang learns it from seeing Monk Gyatso's skeleton, which is the major reason why he becomes so apoplectic later. We really see the bonds between the three main members of Team Avatar. They might fight, they might quarrel, but there's real strength in those connections. We really see how these connections, more than any of their individual abilities, bending or otherwise, is what makes the group strong. They can get through almost anything together because they care about each other so deeply. It's really tender and really warm, really comforting. Not everything is perfect here. There are a few little moments that could have been sharper, could have been better written. And ultimately, there is still the sense that the show is young and that's still growing, and there's still a lot we need to know about these characters. But this is a clear improvement from the first 2 episodes of the show. It's a clear declaration of intent. It's a statement that the show knows exactly what it's doing. We, the audience, have reason to trust the creators going forward. Zuko really is alone here, and the show does not shy away from the dark empathy in that. It's not afraid to show Zuko in a more empathetic light, even a more sympathetic light, even though he is still decisively a villain. This is the first story Zuko gets to himself. It is tangentially about the Avatar, but the Avatar and his friends do not feature in it. It is first and foremost Zuko's story. We get to see it wholly through Zuko's tortured eyes, and the result is quite interesting. We see all the pressure he's facing. We see all the tension on his shoulders. Zhao represents the Fire Nation establishment. Zhao represents everything that Zuko is trying to fight against. The sense that he's not good enough. The sense that he doesn't deserve to come back. The sense that he doesn't deserve his father's approval. And as such, Zuko is not just fighting Zhao. He's fighting that entire mindset. He's fighting that entire way of thinking. And he does his best. The Agni Kai we see them fight is gorgeously orchestrated in every way possible. The animation is brilliant. Every motion, every movement, every bit of choreography is so precise, so exact, and so powerful because of how immaculate it is. This is not a traditional fight sequence. There's less chaos than there is in the fight sequence we saw in the second episode of the show. Instead, it's more formal, more ritualistic, and because of that, it's enhanced somewhat. The drama is more heightened and precise. And all of this is amplified by the music. Oh, the music is wonderful here. It's really elegant, but there's a darkness to it. It's not just exciting, exhilarating battle music, it's intense. There's the clear sense that this means a lot to both of them. Especially Zuko. The music is slower than one would expect, conveying the sense of heightened importance. It's a brilliant sequence on a thematic level, it's a brilliant sequence on a character level, it's a brilliant sequence on a narrative level. It's all very well done, it's all very exact, and it deserves a lot of credit for that. Speaking of the Fire Nation, I love how clever and subtle this show can be. Aang, of course, believes that no one can get to the temples without a flying bison because, having been in the iceberg for 100 years, he's not experienced the rapid march of Fire Nation technology. They have all these new weapons and innovations that they didn't have back before he went into the iceberg, and it is by these innovations that they are able to march into these temples and destroy everything and everyone. It's very subdued, it's very understated, it's implicit, it's tacit, as opposed to a typical kid show, or even a typical adult show, which would outright state what happened in the most obvious black and white terms. There's always a lot more going on in the show below the surface, which is a major reason why I decided to do these Avatar Explained videos in the first place, and this is a minor but I think very important example of that. Part 3. Context. Of course, this is not the only Fire Nation Agni Kai battle with epic music. I am, of course, referring to the final Agni Kai in the second to last episode of the series, episode 320, the Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula. As I've brought up before, there are a lot of parallels between the very beginning of the show and its end. There's the titles of the first and final episodes, The Boy in the Iceberg and Avatar Aang, But there's also these two Agni Kais, one at the very beginning of the show and one at its very end. And they really demonstrate how much Zuko has grown. The first Agni Kai in this episode really exemplifies how alone Zuko is, how isolated he feels from everything and everyone, how frustrated and anxious he is. The final Agni Kai, however, shows how much more confident he becomes, how much more sure of himself he is, and he has Katara on his side. The circumstances have changed significantly from the first Agni Kai. Then it was him against the world, basically. Here, it's him and Katara, this person he has had this very complicated relationship with that has grown into a very strong and resolute friendship, against Azula, who is the one who's feeling alone and isolated and scared of everything and very anxious and paranoid. It's a very nice and subtle parallel that I enjoy a lot. Also, if we're talking about parallels to what the show will do later, we have to talk about Aang and the Sandbenders. I am, of course, talking about the middle of Season 2, when Aang realizes one of these Sandbenders muzzled Appa and sold him. When Aang has this revelation, he destroys one of the Sandbender's vehicles and enters into the Avatar state. Like in this episode, he is basically inconsolable. He's this burning ball of rage and angst and anger until Katara calms him down. Consistently, Katara is the only one who can help Aang. She's the only one who has the compassion and the sympathy to get through to him. He's cut off from everyone else. Much of this is deserved, earned anger, but much of it is also childishness. He doesn't know how to handle that anger. He needs someone who can help him, and Katara is that person. The relationship between them is best developed not in the explicit love episodes, which are hit and miss, but in the episodes where it's really shown how deeply Katara understands him and how completely she can help him get through his anger and frustration with the world and everything that has happened. The Airbender genocide is something we have known about since before the first episode of the show, since the very first sequence of the show, but it hasn't really felt real until now. It's felt like just a piece of backstory. A lot of fantasy works that introduce something that should be really incendiary, but then they don't do much with it. It's supposed to just stand on its own as something really powerful and terrible and harmful, but it doesn't feel that way because the characters don't talk about it. They don't directly interact with that terrible piece of backstory. It just hangs there, and so it doesn't have the resonance the writer wants it to. In this episode, the writers of Avatar: The Last Airbender prove themselves aware of this trap, and they deal with it head on. There's an astounding sense of purpose in this episode. It's really meant to show the gravitas of this horrific, grisly event and how deeply it affects a 12-year-old kid like Aang. Really, everything starts to feel more real in this episode. The first two episodes prove a premise, and they prove it well, but this third episode is what takes Avatar from being a good idea for a show to truly being a great show. It's not as good as it will become, but from this point forward, everything feels that much more honest and that much more satisfying and cathartic and weighty. Nothing just feels purely theoretical anymore, because the show has proved that it is willing to dig into the dark parts of its history and handle those dark parts with aplomb and real deft writing. It builds that confidence going forward, and the show takes full advantage of that. Everything builds in this show. Nothing's just a one-off. Nothing is introduced just to be ignored later. Everything matters in a very real and fundamental sense. This episode proves that absolutely. From this point forward, everything escalates. Everything feels at least a little bit more immediate, a little bit more true. There's no distance between we as the audience and what's happening. The show establishes that in this episode, and with rare exception, that does not change going forward. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, donate to my Patreon if you liked what you saw today, and tune in for the next Avatar analysis. Adios, comrades.